Hi, I'm Chris Butler, and I wanted to talk about some of the important trends I'm seeing at the intersection of conversational AI and ambient computing. I've had this Echo device for 6, maybe 7 years now, and during that entire time, I've used it for a lot of different reasons, mostly weather, mostly music, but also to be able to interact with a lot of services that are online. What I've started to find, though, as I had children and they started to use the device, that I was having a real problem with them skewing all of the recommendations I had on, say, Spotify. And that was because they were using the device and the device didn't know that it was actually them using it rather than me. And this really led me to a place over the last, say, year where I've been thinking about this concept of communal devices. And mostly when we talk about voice services for, say, home assistants, really, how do we do a better job of creating not only platforms and devices like the Echo, but also for skill developers that are building skills on top of these platforms to do a better job of actually embracing everybody that could potentially use these devices in the home and office. And so, when I think about communal computing, I don't just think about the idea of the Echo, but also things like connected light bulbs, sockets, the idea of the Apple TV being a shared device, and even, as classically as the telephone, the landline kitchen telephone that we used to have was really probably the first communal connected device that we had. And the real problem with these, and the reason why things like the Spotify playlist get screwed up or Netflix has implemented everything around profiles, is that they were originally built for this single user context. And that single user context, which is something that comes from all the way back in the days of initial client server architectures where you need to do things like time sharing between multiple accounts, that has been transferred over into this idea of computing in the home. And it makes more sense when we talk about it from the standpoint of a personal phone, like an iPhone or an Android device, or my laptop. But once we start to reintroduce general computing through something like the Echo, we really start to have these problems around who is actually using the device if it's not the person that actually registered and bought the device. And so, I think that's something I've been really concerned about. And I think there's really 5 major kind of problem sets that come out of the fact that people are not building these devices in a communal way. And so one is identity, who's actually using the device. Second one is privacy, right? Is the person that's using the device appropriate to gain access to it, to either publish information or gain access to information? Security, which is the third kind of grouping of issues, is should they have actually the access? 4 is the experience. How do we deal with individuals that may not be registered with the device or groups of people together? And then finally, ownership. What happens when someone brings these devices into their home, installs them in their home, and then either the company gets acquired, they decide to change the terms of use, or even the fact that you end up leaving the place you're living, and how does that actually impact the next owners of those devices? And I think the way that I've started to think about this is we need to use a more ecosystem-based approach, which is that there's actually this graph of people, systems, devices, intermediating services that we need to think of holistically, rather than just a single individual person with a device. And that's referred to by Dr. Sally Applin as design individualism, which is really just seeing one device and one person, when the reality is there's like a whole map of these things. And if you listen to the Google I/O presentation earlier this year, there's hundreds of types of devices that Google is now considering to be part of their smart home. And so, I think when we talk about like the types of things that skill developers should be thinking about right now, there's really 4 pieces of advice I would give them. So the first one is to use things like voice profiles, if they are available and if they've been set up. And that's a big if, right? Both groups like the Alexa have voice profiles. Google Home Hub has voice match. There's a bunch of different services that are now starting to think about this idea of voice biometric to at least do personalization, if not maybe authentication. But it's not quite clear how often people are actually setting these profiles up, how often they're using them. And so I think that's the first piece of advice I would give. The second piece of advice is that when we talk about getting behavioral data from communal devices, we should not consider it in the same way that we get behavioral data from personal devices. So in the case of Spotify, right, using the behavioral data of my usage on the Spotify mobile app on my personal phone, that behavioral data should be very different than if, say, listened to on an Echo or on a Google Home Hub, because there's no way for us to actually know who's in the room there. And so I would just say that there should be, maybe distrust of that data, maybe blocking of that data into a different area. And that gets to our third point, which is that we probably should be building pseudo identities around a location rather than a person. So just because I was the person that actually bought this Echo and then set it up and put it somewhere, it doesn't mean that I'm the only person that's going to be using it. But what is maybe interesting is that if it's in a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, a dining room, that fact that it is in one location is probably more interesting and more related to the people that will have access to it than me as an individual. And so maybe building these pseudo identities around that location. So this is a device that's in the kitchen. And so the behavioral information, say for like listening to music, should actually be a profile that's built around that location of the kitchen rather than me as an individual. And then finally, I think we need, because there's so much nuance in the context, and this is tied up in a lot of things like social norms about who's actually in that room and the relationship between people, you may need to just ask when you're in doubt. And so, that could mean that if someone tries to activate a voice skill that would say, declare the bank account balance of someone, it probably is valid to ask, hey, I'm about to say out loud a bank account balance. Are you sure you want to do that for this person? And the person who made that command, because they're actually governed by norms and actually renegotiating norms all the time between different people, they can actually check the room and decide whether it's appropriate to move forward with that. So anyways, I've done a lot of writing about this in the O'Reilly blog. There's 3 articles there. I've done some workshops around how we apply things like animistic design mapping and role play to building better devices. But I think this is something that when we talk about like what ambient AI means and how we deal with kind of the issues around communal computing in the home and office, that's something that I've been thinking about an awful lot and I think would be really valuable for Voice 2021. So thank you very much.